Greetings, Alpha 40 fans. Welcome to another monthly deck tech update and adventures in Alpha 40. Last month was February. We ran this blue-white control deck, and we lost all three of our matches. The first match we lost 0-2 to a red-green Elves, Orcish Oriflamme, Giant Growth, Mana Barbs, two-headed Giant Wheel of Fortune deck, which was really spicy. We lost in 3 games to a blue-red Burn Orcish Artillery deck that was pretty aggressive. And then the last match we played, we lost 0-2 to a mono-green Berserk deck that absolutely just overwhelmed this deck with all their creatures. This was 40 cards. This month I'm going to roll out the Dan Frazier Mox Sapphire playmat that we picked up in MagicCon Chicago. I like that it goes with the blue cards in this deck. So to recap what we played in February, we ran 6 copies of Basic Islands for the blue spells. We ran 4 copies of Basic Plains for the white spells. And then we ran 6 copies of the dual lands that were Tundra, Underground Sea, Tropical Island, the blue duals, and Scrubland, Savannah, and Bayou, the black and green duals. We used those to splash black and green for the Demonic Tutor and the Regrowth, which we'll show you in a sec. The blue spells, we ran Time Twister, Mana Short, Power Sink, Counterspell, Copy Artifact, and 3 Psionic Blasts. So the basic build of this deck was Black Vise, Time Twister, with a little direct damage from the Psionic Blasts. And then we had 3 Swords of Plowshares, 2 Disenchants, and 2 Circle of Protection Blues, which was the spicy tech. This prevented damage from the Psionic Blasts to ourselves, so we could do 4 damage to our opponents or their creatures and prevent the 2 damage to ourselves. And then we wanted to cast some artifacts. So we have Soul Ring, the best mana rock in Alpha 40, Chaos Orb, which is a good destruction removal spell, 3 copies of Black Vise, which go with the Time Twister, a Howling Mine to give them more cards and give ourselves more cards, and an Ivory Cup to gain life off of the white spells, plus the Demonic Tutor and Regrowth. We wanted to tutor for the Time Twister, cast it, put more cards in their hand, make them take damage to Black Vise, and then regrow it and do that multiple times. The first match, the opponent had the Wheel of Fortune, and he was actually able to cast the Wheel of Fortune when I had the Time Twister in my hand. I did not have a counter spell, so the Time Twister went in the graveyard, and I was pretty messed up that match in a hole. So these are the cards that I would like to swap out for this deck. It's going to be pretty close to a Psychic Venom deck that we've played before on the channel. We have run up to 6, maybe 7, 8 Psychic Venoms, but we're going to keep it kind of moderate. We're going to just do 3 copies of Psychic Venom. So what we're going to do is take out the Psionic Blasts. I'll show you how this works in a sec. The Psionic Blasts are going to come out. We're going to replace those with Psychic Venoms. If you didn't have Circle of Protection Blue and you cast Psionic Blast, it would do 2 damage to your opponent, 4 damage to your opponent, and 2 damage to you, which is a net 2 damage to your opponent. So basically, Psychic Venom kind of replaces the same effect. It does 2 damage every time they tap a land or you tap their land, and does not do damage to yourself. And it only costs 2 mana, whereas Psionic Blast costs 3 mana. So this is slightly easier to use and reuse, especially when we put some other cards in the deck. We're going to put in Balance. You'll see in a sec, we still have no creatures, so this is kind of a board wipe if they're running creatures. But we're going to take out one of these Circle of Protection Blues now that we're not running Psionic Blast and worried about preventing damage to ourselves, blue damage. And then we're also going to take out this other copy of Circle of Protection Blue and put in 1 copy of Disenchant, so that we'll have 3 Disenchants to get rid of their artifacts or their enchantments if they're running Mana Barbs. We can take that out. We'll keep the 3 Swords of Plowshares because we want to remove their creatures if they're running creatures. If they're on a creatureless deck, then Swords to Plowshares, I think, becomes a dead card in our hand. So we'll see if that comes into play at all in the month of March. Since we put balance in, we have to take out Chaos Orb because of the destruction spell rules. So Chaos Orb comes out. Happy to report that we hit all of our orb flips last month. We hit all, I don't know how many of those we hit. So we're gonna put in Disrupting Scepter, which makes your opponent discard cards, which is really bad with Black Vise. So we're gonna take out the Black Vises, probably for the first time in over a year that we've played the Twister Vise deck without Black Vises. And we're gonna put in Icy Manipulators instead. Icy Manipulators can tap their lands, and if they have Psychic Venoms on their lands, they will take 2 damage. So we're gonna take out all 3 Black Vises this month. And we're gonna put in 3 copies of Icy Manipulator. We could also use Icy to tap their creatures if they have creatures in play and we don't have any blockers. We can just tap down their creatures at the start of their turn so that they cannot attack us. And then draw a spell. We're gonna take out Howling Mine, which is a has some symmetry where we would both draw cards. And so I'm gonna try to give the card advantage to myself and put in Jayemdae Tome as the draw spell. This works nicely too with Disrupting Scepter because this makes them discard cards and this lets me draw cards. So if I was able to, for 7 mana, make them discard 1 card for 3 mana, and I drew 1 card for 4 mana, we would be 2 cards difference. I'm gonna take out this Ivory Cup and put in Crystal Rod because I feel like if I'm unable to cast Swords to Plowshare or Disenchant, I'm only gonna be able to gain off a few white spells, but I have more blue spells in my deck with the Psychic Venoms that I can cast and put in to use Crystal Rod. And then the last 2 cards, I'm gonna take out Copy Artifact since I'm not too interested in copy artifacting the Black Vises anymore. So Copy Artifact will come out and I'm gonna put in Drain Power instead. Drain Power is a sorcery. When I cast it, it taps the opponent's lands and takes all the mana and puts it in my mana pool. So the idea would be to have Psychic Venoms on their lands, tap their lands, they take 2, 4 to 6 damage. I put the mana into Disrupting Scepter or Jayemdae Tome and I draw cards. So it doesn't matter what color mana they're using. I can use it for colorless or I can use it for Icy Manipulator to tap their cards, their permanents down. And then Counterspell was good, but it requires 2 blue mana. So I'm just gonna replace it with Power Sink, which is also a counterspell, but in response, it forces your opponents to tap their lands. So that has some symmetry with Psychic Venom. So if I am able to tap their lands with the Drain Power or the Power Sink, or even the Mana Short, which taps their lands and empties their mana pool, I can use that to tap the lands that have the Psychic Venoms on them and do damage to them through Psychic Venom. Just hoping that they don't have a Circle of Protection blue. It's not a very common card in the main deck, so I ran 2 copies last month and everybody was surprised by that, so I don't think anyone's gonna run Circle of Protection blue in March. If they do, I have Disenchants to take out their 1 or 2 copies of Circle of Protection blue, and then I'll just tap their cards, do the damage with the Psychic Venoms. I can either stack these all on 1 land and then Icy Manipulator that land and do 2, 4 to 6 damage each time I tap that land, or I can spread them out and make them tap 1, 2, or 3 lands to do damage. And taking cards out of their hand will definitely make it harder for them to cast spells that away. So that's the deck. I'm gonna keep the Demonic Tutor and the Regrowth in. The object would be just to tutor for Twister, remove their permanents. If they have creatures, you can Swords to Plowshare their creatures. Those go out of the game. Then when you Twister, they have a smaller deck size. They don't get those creatures back. So every time, in theory, you could do 3 Swords to Plowshares, remove 3 creatures, time Twister, and then the next turn, the next few turns, do 3 more Swords to Plowshares, take out 3 more creatures until they have no more creatures left. And then by that point, I don't think they have too many threats. We can also balance, which gets the creatures off the board. Balance works better with Disrupting Scepter and having the Black Vises out of the way. We're not worried about trying to keep cards in their hand for the Black Vises, so we kind of want to empty their hand, especially if they're on a control deck. We want to get all the counter spells out of their hand so that they can't counterspell our Time Twister or Regrowth when we want to get the Twister back. So that's a deck from March. I'll give you a report at the end of the month and let you know how it did. Thanks again for watching Alpha 40. The league rules are in the description below if you want to check out Alpha 40 and build your own 40 card deck with Alpha cards. Prices are cheap. Format's fun. I recommend it. See you next month.